Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to askNK. This is our weekly rundown of events, updates, and beautiful things happening within the Blender community, Blender Foundation, and also Blender as an app. And this week we do have a couple of things that you guys will definitely want to take a look at. First off, we're going to start out with Blender 2.83.13 being released. So the LTS version of Blender 2.83.13 version is now available. So just in case you have issues with rendering, some CUDA problems, or maybe you're having some symmetrical issues, and you're just wondering if this would be fixed for 2.83 because it's within its LTS. Right now there are 9 bugs that has been fixed, and you can simply take a look at the changelog and see which of these things that you're currently having issues with that has been fixed right now. And for those who like to get this, you can get this on both the Windows Store, Steam, and also Snap. And speaking about things and where you can get Blender, the folks at the free open source software torrent have also added Blender 2.92 and also Blender 2.83.13, the current LTS, within their torrents. So just in case you want to download these, you can simply go ahead and grab this. And speaking about the folks at free open source software, they have a lot of torrents that you can get. So just in case, you want to get some free stuff, you want to download these things, probably you're using Linux and you want to get some cool stuff within the torrents, you can actually go through and take a look at this. And speaking of these cool things, Blender 2.93 is currently gearing up for the Bcon 2. So the Bcon 2 will be starting off on March the 17th, which is this coming week, and this is going to be going through till we get into the Bcon 3 that will be happening on the 14th of April. And from there we get to see the pre-release and then the final release of Blender 2.93, and by then we can now have fun playing with all these beautiful features that are currently coming. And for those who will be wondering what are the cool features that is available for this week, of course we're going to go through and take a look at them. So with Blender 2.93 simply opened right here, the alpha, you can see that there is nothing so special, that is here. But I'll actually go through and show you guys a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. So within the UI, there is a couple of updates right here within the UI, and it has to do with the fuzzy search, as they have actually preferred to add the items to become shorter. So if we go in and press F3, you would notice that this is now shorter. Contrary to what we have in previous versions of Blender, where you get to see all of this in all of their tenses and then you get to see shortcuts attached to them, they've actually gone ahead to make this one a little bit shorter. Something else which they've also done is in terms of how you get to see some of the descriptions right here in Blender, instead of the word draw, they have now decided to replace them with display. Draw is actually one of those things that a lot of people get to use in terms of drawing graphics on top of something. But right now, I think the dictionary meaning is actually what is contradicting the whole idea, and they decided to switch over to display instead of draw to just simply clean up things and make it a little bit more understandable for everyone. And with that said as well, there is also a couple of updates. So before we actually talk about the updates that is available right now, I'd like to bring your attention to something that we talked about last week. So last week we talked about the cool implementation and also review and the conversation about the spreadsheet. So most of you guys would have no idea what this is, but I'll go through, explain this thing to you guys, walk through it, and so that you can see what you need to know. So what is this spreadsheet? By default, the spreadsheet is just a simple window where you can debug, take a look at the data set, see a couple of filters, and also you can preview different objects and components directly within that particular viewport or within that particular space. Also be able to see the values that is attached to this. Very similar to what we have with Houdini. So for this one right now, for those who like to use this, it is actually present in Blender 2.93 as we speak, which we'll go through and take a look at. But there's a couple of things that you need to know. So there is a view mode, there's also the data set, and also the filters that will be attached to them. You can tell the number of points you have within a particular object, you can tell how many edges there are, you can tell the volume count, and more especially if you do have attributes to create attributes, you can actually see these attributes. So very, very Houdini-like, and it also makes sense because at any point in time you can also go through and implement certain rules, and you can have some effectors happening as well. Although there is no conversation if this is going to be added with modifiers or if you can have some sort of synergy with modifiers as well, but right now this is what the mockup looks like, and we're definitely going to jump directly into Blender and see if this is something that is available, because yes it is. So how you can get started with this is if you drag this all the way up and you go over here within your editor type, you can now switch over to spreadsheet. So spreadsheet is here. So you guys might be wondering, okay, so what is this? So right now this is like a basic implementation of the spreadsheet, And at this point, you can now see the number of points that exist on this given cube. So let's say if I go in and tap G to move that aside and choose to throw in Suzanne, our lovely Suzanne, you can now see the number of points that we have. What this point helps you do is you can now use this point and do a couple of cool tricks, especially with the geometry node. Despite this, because you can actually, randomize your points, you can actually wiggle this point and do a couple of cool tricks with points. You can use these things to drive and create some very interesting shapes and also interesting designs. So with this right here, you can tell the number of points that we have on Suzanne, and if we scroll all the way down, you can actually see that we have a couple of points. I guess that's going to be a lot, but if we go all the way back and we choose to switch this from points to edges, you notice there is no data for this right now. If we switch to corners, you can see the number of corners because we have the UV map attached to this, and then if we switch over to polygon, we can see the number of polygons that we have. If we go through and choose to smooth shade this object, you can see that the smooth shade section gets ticked, and this one is it's also pretty cool. So you can tell what point has smooth shade turned on, and you can actually use this to tell a couple of things. So where does this actually make sense, and also how do you get to use it? Now at this point is where we're going to go in and talk a little bit more about how this new implementation in Blender 2.93 would help your geometry node creation stuff. So first things first, we would actually go in here, and I'm just going to drag myself something cool, click right here and switch over to geometry nodes. So with the geometry nodes right here, if we go all the way and I select this object and choose to add a brand new geometry node, we can start doing some very cool stuff. So one of the first things which I would like to show you guys is, by default, let me switch this back to points so that you guys can see. By default, you can notice that because we have just this simple object, we have our points positions in both X, Y, and Z. And some of you guys might be asking, why is this set to 7? By default, this has 8 different points. But then if you take a look at it, you would notice that points gets counted from 0 all the way to the nth number. So what else can you see? So right here as well, you can also switch this from mesh to point cloud. So we can also switch this all the way back, and you can see that. So let's start doing some very cool tricks so that you guys can get started with it. So first things first, which I would like to show you guys is, by default, we've already seen that there is a couple of implementation that deals with points to volume. So what can we do? So we can do a point to volume and add that there, and now you would notice we don't have anything. If I switch these over to polygons, nothing, corners, nothing, nothing, and nothing, because currently there is no point that is attached here. The reason why you can't see any point is because this is a volume. So if we do a volume to mesh, you can now see that we will be having a couple of more points, and this makes sense. So from this point, you can see where individual points on individual surfaces are placed in space, and at any point in time, you can use the sliders to increase and also reduce. So if we go in and we start playing with this, and we start doing this, you can tell that this thing starts moving back and forth. Of course, right now it looks like, okay, this is it looks normal. What else can we do with it? So there are certain cool things that we can do with this, and we're also going to get started by talking about how this would help you in terms of your attributes. So let's say by default you have a simple cube like this, and you would like to throw in a simple attribute and do some cool stuff, and maybe you want to have these attributes tied over to this mesh and also displayed here so that you can use this to actually drive certain things. And how you can do this is pretty simple. So we can go in and do an attribute field. So I'm just going to drop that one right there. And right over here, if we click, this is also a brand new implementation to the geometry nodes that you can now tell what attributes you have directly here. So at this point, we can now select whatever attributes we want to work with, but then you can go in and write your own attribute. So for this, I can go in and write a word like rotate. So I'm just going to use that word like rotate and press the enter key, and automatically you would notice that we have a brand new attribute within this section. So with the spreadsheet, you can now see the attributes that are tied over to an object. And because you can now see the attributes tied to an object, and this object also works with a point, you can now easily go in there and do some randomization. So we can say we want to, randomize this attribute. So because we've already created this attribute right here, I can now go in there and add that attribute. And once I add it, I can set my minimum to 0 and the maximum to 1, and you can see that the attributes that we have here that has been randomized travels all the way from 0 to 0.9. So if I also go in and start increasing that, you can also tell, but you don't visually see this thing, so it doesn't make sense, right? So how do you work with this? So because we've already taken a look at the previous example, we can now go in here and do a point to volume. Remember the first thing we did, and then we can add that. And because we have already created this attribute and we have this attribute right here, we can now easily tell where things are. So take a look at this. So at this point, if we go in and start increasing the radius, what we're actually doing is we're increasing the radius of this attribute, and we can also play with the density of this attribute. So to properly visualize this, I would go in and get the volume to mesh and throw this one right in there, and you can now start seeing that we have this. So at this point, we have the attributes, and because we have this attribute right now, we can also use this to control how we want things to be. So we can come over here and then we can increase the density, and you can start seeing that density, and we can also increase the maximum. We can set this however we want, but then if we like to use the attributes which we have right here to drive the point, we can now go in and change these to attributes, and that way originally it's set to radius. We can set this back to that rotate attribute that we have, and at this point we can start doing some interesting things. So we can do this, and because we have this random attribute that is currently driving the point, and the point is currently driving the mesh, you can now see that whatever value we're throwing in here is actually influencing the spreadsheet. So at this point, you can see what the spreadsheet looks like, and you can actually tell what is going on. So that is one of those cool things that you can do with something like this. So if we also go over here, we can choose to add a subdivision modifier. So we can go in and add a simple subdivision, and then we can subdivide this and, you know, have fun with it. Now, something else which has been implemented as well is the simple fact that at any point in time you're done creating anything within the geometry node, you can now go over and apply this. And this for me is it's very, very interesting. There are several things that you can easily create with the geometry node, and it just makes sense that you can now apply this and create them as static meshes. And for those who will be saying, you know, this was something that was possible before, nope, in 2.92 this was not possible. So if you take a look at the 2.92, we go over to geometry node and you try to apply this, it deletes the entire thing. So this is actually something that you can now do with the current version of Blender 2.93. And with that said, we'll also go over and take a look at one more tiny thing, which is a cool update that you can now see. So you guys remember the last time we talked about the geometry node, I was also telling you guys that there is a new implementation of an attribute error icon. So what does that mean? So let's say we go in and we throw in something like this, and just for some reason, let's say I choose to do an attribute sample texture, which is pretty cool, and I drag that right in there, click over here, and you know, right now they've also implemented a very tiny button which deals with the fact that if you click on this button right now, it opens this up. So we can now go in, let's just simply select anything that we want, and I could just go in and throw in something like that and throw in something like this. So what they've also added is if you throw in any unknown attribute, so if you throw in an unknown attribute, so let's say I go in here and type the word A for example, and then I type the word B for example, and I decide to say radius for example as well, or rate for example, you would notice that it has this icon now. So with this icon, you can now see that it tells you clearly that it does understand the meaning of the word A and B, and at the same time, there is no attribute that is assigned to this. You can also tell that because this attribute doesn't exist, we don't get to see it here. So it's just very interesting to see that the spreadsheet is one of those cool things that is now available in Blender 2.93, and of course this is definitely going to help a lot of people while working within the geometry node. So there is also a couple more implementations of these to come, and I'm very, very excited to see them, and for sure I would love to see this work with modifiers as well. Hopefully maybe we can get some very cool stuff. Something else that the folks at Blender Foundation have also talked about is in the coming updates you would also be able to bring in primitive shapes directly into the geometry node. And this way, instead of, you know, perpetually going back and forth creating a cube, you can just simply create the cube directly in here, invoke that to work, and, you know, do some cool stuff with it. And while we're actually talking about this, it's also worth knowing that the Grease Pencil is also having a little update, and this has to do with the fact that right now there is an auto keyframe that is currently turned on. So contrary to previous times, which you can actually take a look at. So if we also go in here and take a look at what we have before, you would notice that this isn't turned on. And what this means is, by default, if I go in and I type the word A, let's say this is the art I'm trying to create, and I go over to B and I do a simple B, all right, and go over to C and do a simple C, you can obviously tell that we just have these things locked. So there is literally no way where you can say, all right, I want to stop and update the previous drawing. You have to go over to the previous keyframe and then, you know, start tweaking that. But what they've done in the new version right now, or in the new update, is at any point in time you start off. So let's say we start off by writing a simple A, and let's say we go over here and do a simple B as well, and then we move over here and do a simple C. What now happens is you can turn this off, and then you can go over to your previous frame and you can start doing some changes. Now, regardless of going over to your previous frame, at any point in time that you are working, you can also choose to make some updates. So right now I can go in here and choose to do some updates like this, and maybe just do some update like so, and this would exist within the last frame. So contrary to having unnecessary frames as you proceed, you can actually do any updates that you want after the previous frame has been set. So if we go over to A and I choose to do some updates within A, let's say I choose to do some X updates right here, maybe do some X updates right here, this would exist within this key, and you can see that we have that there, and have this here, and then we can also go in here and start doing, you know, some very cool updates as well. So this now makes more sense contrary to what we had previously. And before we actually go through and talk about some of the updates that is now available within the community, and also a couple more updates that you can go through and try out yourself, the folks at Blender Foundation have finally implemented the Sculpt expand. So last time we talked about the Sculpt expand. We did a full video about that one, something that Pablo implemented. And it is pretty interesting to see that right now that this is now implemented into the master. And if you go over to your Sculpt room and you hold down Shift and tap A on your keyboard, you can now do some very creative and cool stuff. So at any point in time you want to create some pretty cool things, you can now easily, you know, go through and do these things. So this now makes sense. And of course, for those who like to try this out, for those who want to see how these things get to work, and maybe you want to see some more stuff about it, it is pretty interesting to see that there is actually something that looks like this right now that exists in Blender. And these are some of the updates that are currently available in Blender 2.93 as we speak. Although there are still a couple more updates that you guys may want to go through and take a look at, and also there are some updates that are coming. So for Grease Pencil as well, there is an update that is coming that deals with the fact that they are considering how you will be able to export your stuff from Grease Pencil. So in case you want to export or import SVG and also PDF file, it's something they're looking at ways that you can do that. There's also a conversation about improvements for the fill tool, and also on how you get to work with the Bezier curve. Speaking of which, there's also a very cool read which you might want to take a look at that deals with the asset browser, in bracket the pose library basics. So in case you want to read this one up, or maybe you want to also take a look at some of the implementations that might be coming over to 2.93, I'm going to put a link in the description where you can go through and take a look at this and also see some of the milestone and, you know, things that might potentially be coming to the asset browser. With that said as well, there is also a pretty cool update in terms of the pose sliding tools that is now available in Blender for animation. This is one sector of update that is beginning to pick up speed. And with that said as well, there is also a couple more updates that is coming over to both the NLA and also the NLE. So for those who are working with Blender Sequencer, there's also a couple of updates coming to that as well. So with this thing said, let's go over and talk about some cool things happening to the community. Blender has now been accepted into the Google Summer of Code, and right here we've already talked about the fact that you guys should submit some ideas. So just in case you want to come through, read up some of those things, you might also take a look at the link in the description and see these things for yourself. And with this said as well, there is an update to the Blender for Unreal Engine add-on. So we've gone through, we've made a video about it, we've seen how you can move things back and forth. And right now, this update looks pretty solid. So one of the cool things right now is sockets and collision shapes are created directly in Blender, and you can pretty much choose what animation you want to export. So at this point, you can also take a look at how you can move things from Blender over to Unreal Engine And for those who would like to see a video which will cover about this work process, I'm also going to put that link in the description so that you can go through and take a look at this one and see how it works. And while we speak about add-ons, there is also a pretty cool add-on that you guys may want to take a look at. So the folks at Blender Productions or B Productions right now has updated their Vegetation tool, and now it is Vegetation version 2. So this now comes with a couple more things. About 25 different new assets are now available here, and they're actually doing a 10% off discount. So just in case you want to own this, you can simply go over to the link in the description and grab it. Meanwhile, there's a couple more updates that is coming over to this one as well, as I did speak with the developer, and they're actually looking at ways that they can make this add-on even more powerful. One of the cool advantage for this one as well is you don't only have variations that you get to work with, but at the same time, if you're looking for animated trees, animated leaves, this is an add-on that also gets you up to speed with that. The folks at B Productions are also the creators of the transportation add-on, which we've already talked about on the channel before. So just in case you want to take a look at this, you can simply go over to the link in the description, take a look at the videos, take a look at the page, and see if it is something that you're worth getting. And with that said as well, for those who are interested in working with real-time camera motion capture, and you want to be able to capture motions by yourself, you don't want to be limited by what you can get directly on your PC, then you might want to consider taking a look at this free add-on. So the virtual camera is a free add-on that you can get for both Blender and Maya, but the add-on itself does work with only your iPhone, and that is the caveat for that. It simply means that you need to go over to the App Store and purchase this. I did purchase this and I played with it before, so I might actually also go ahead and make a full video about this. So just in case you guys are interested about it, you can do well to tell me. So this one, in its sense, it's about $5. So just think about it like you're buying the developer a coffee. And with this, you can actually walk through and do some very cool camera movement, especially for layout designers. You can actually control your cameras directly in both Maya and Blender with your mobile device. And something else you guys need to look forward to is askNK will be doing a very small challenge very soon. So simply keep your eye open in the notification and see what this challenge is going to be about, and also what you stand to gain if you join this challenge. And for those who like to take a look at all of these things that we've talked about, you want to grab these things, you want to play with it, you want to read them up, you can simply take a look at the link in the description and check these things out. Tell me what you guys think about this one in the comment section. And of course, if you like this video or you learned something from this, you can go ahead and give it a like, and don't forget to share with a friend. And if you're new here, it's going to be amazing for you to hit the subscribe button and also turn on notifications so that you don't miss next video or the next update. And until I see you guys again with the tutorial update, Free Friday, Tutorial Tuesday, tips and tricks, things like this. Peace.